On Christmas morning, I made the house look just the way my wife always liked it. Golden lights along the porch rails, old ornaments we'd saved through the years, hung on the tree. I cooked the best dinner I knew how: rosemary roast beef, creamy garlic, mashed potatoes, and a pecan pie cooling on the counter. This was my first Christmas without Margaret. She'd been gone for 5 months. More than anything, I wanted my son Michael and his wife Ashley sitting at my table. I set out the good china, lit the candles, and waited. But instead of hearing their car pull into the drive, a courier showed up with an envelope. The note inside left no doubt they hadn't forgotten me. They had simply chosen to be somewhere else. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and comment where you're watching from. The delivery guy couldn't have been older than 20. He wore a red windbreaker, thin gloves, and had that restless look of someone with a long list left to finish before getting home. "Delivery for Franklin Moore," he said, eyes sliding past me toward the warmth inside. "Yes," I answered quietly. He handed over the envelope, gave a quick nod, and went back down the steps. The crunch of his shoes on the frosted walk was the only sound, until the low cough of his engine faded down the street. The envelope was warm from his hands, but thin. I knew before opening it there'd be nothing good inside. My fingers hovered over the flap for a moment. I looked at the porch railing wrapped in lights, the soft glow they cast on the snowy steps, and thought how Margaret would have stood right behind me, curious as ever. She always wanted to know who was at the door. I opened the letter. Ashley's handwriting, small and neat with looping curves, sat in the center of the page. "Franklin, we decided to spend Christmas at my mom's this year. Hope you understand. Love, Ashley." That was it. No Merry Christmas, no let's plan for next week, not even a phone call ahead of time. Understand? I stepped back inside, shutting the cold out. From the hallway I could see the dining room glowing beneath the chandelier. The roast beef sat on its platter, still steaming. The mashed potatoes looked smooth and creamy in their bowl, a sprig of parsley on top, just how Margaret liked it. The pecan pie on the counter caught the kitchen light, its crust perfectly golden. I'd spent hours on everything. 2 days of marinating the beef, baking the pie the night before, ironing the holiday tablecloth. I laid out the china, polished the silver, folded the napkins into little fans the way Margaret used to. The candles flickered gently, their light dancing off the crystal glasses. It was exactly the Christmas she would have loved. Only now, it was just me. I poured a glass of sweet tea, sat at the head of the table, and tried to eat. The roast beef was tender seasoned, just right, but it might as well have been cardboard. My throat tightened halfway through chewing, and I washed it down with tea. After a few bites, I set my fork aside. Nothing had flavor. I blew out the candles and packed most of the food away. The pie stayed on the counter. Some part of me couldn't put it in the fridge, maybe because Margaret always left dessert out just in case someone stopped by. But nobody was coming. I knew that. I picked up my phone mostly to distract myself. I wasn't expecting a call or text. They'd already made their choice. Still, I scrolled. And there it was, Ashley's mom's Facebook post. A long table loaded with food, wine glasses glinting, faces leaning close, lit with laughter. At the far end, Michael sat beside Ashley, his hand over hers, smiling in a way I hadn't seen in years. The caption read, "So grateful for a house full of family this Christmas." Grateful. The words sank in my chest like a stone. They were grateful for that table, not mine. I stared at the photo until my screen dimmed. My mind drifted back to when Michael was a boy. Christmas mornings, he'd race down the hall in pajamas at dawn, the smell of cinnamon rolls filling the house. Margaret would pull them from the oven, powdered sugar dusting the air. On Christmas Eve, I'd read him "'Twas the Night Before Christmas" by the fire, his head heavy against my shoulder. For years, our home had been the place for Christmas. After Michael married, I tried to split the holidays 1 year with us, 1 year with them. But slowly that became, "We'll see if we can stop by." I told myself it was just how life went. Married couples juggle holidays, people stay busy. But sending a courier on Christmas Day wasn't busyness. It was a message. I set the phone down, screen facing the table, and leaned back. The house was too quiet. I could hear the clock ticking in the living room, each second pulling me further away from the life I once had. The fire popped softly in the fireplace, but even that felt hollow. I glanced at the tree in the corner. The gold star on top was the one Michael made in 3rd grade. One point had broken off years ago, but Margaret always insisted it go right up front. "It's perfect as it is," she'd say. I wondered what she would have said about today. Maybe she'd have told me not to take it so personally, to enjoy my dinner. But Margaret would have known better. She'd have known it wasn't just about dinner, it was about what it meant. At some point, I moved into the living room. The recliner creaked as I sat same spot I'd sat every Christmas night for 40 years. Only this time, the chair beside me, hers, was empty. Margaret's knitting basket was still there, a ball of yarn, half unraveled. I hadn't moved it. Outside, a car drove slowly down the wet street, headlights sweeping across the wall. For a moment, I thought maybe they'd changed their minds, but the car kept going. I leaned forward, elbows on my knees, hands clasped. Tried to tell myself it was just one holiday. But deep down, I knew better. This wasn't about one night. It had been building for years, and Margaret would have said the same. Ashley's note still lay on the counter. I picked it up again. The cheerful loops of her script looked almost cruel against the plain white paper. I imagined them writing it. Did Michael even read it before it was sent? Or had Ashley, like always, taken care of the family communication, sparing him from the discomfort of saying it himself? By then, the roast beef had cooled completely. I slid the containers into the fridge, the rush of cold air brushing against me as I closed the door. The pie was still sitting on the counter untouched. I couldn't bring myself to cover it. Around 900, I gave up pretending to watch television. One by one, I switched off the strings of lights on the tree and headed down the hall toward my bedroom. On the dresser was a framed picture from the last Christmas we'd spent with Margaret. That year, Michael and Ashley had shown up late, already full from another meal. In the photo, Margaret's smile was as warm as ever. Michael looked polite, almost distant. I sat on the edge of the bed staring at that photo until my eyes blurred. When I finally lay down, the empty space beside me was cold. For the first time, I admitted to myself it wasn't that they'd forgotten me. They had chosen someone else's table. The next morning, I woke earlier than usual. Not that I'd really slept. Most of the night, I'd stared at the ceiling, watching the shadows from the branches outside drift across the wall. The tree lights were still glowing in the living room. I must have forgotten to shut them off before bed. Their soft light fell over the furniture, not warm, but frozen, like a snapshot, pretty, but lifeless. I didn't bother with coffee. My head felt too restless to stand still in the kitchen. I pulled on a sweater and stepped outside. The air stung my face, sharp and cold, the kind of cold that catches in your chest if you breathe too deep. The grass sparkled with frost, each blade rimmed in white. The bird bath was frozen solid. Margaret used to begin her mornings out here, no matter the season. She'd walk the stone path to the garden and check the bird feeder that hung from the old maple near the fence line. I never understood it back then. Why feed birds in the dead of winter? But she'd just smile and say, "Because they still need to eat, Franklin, even when no one else is watching." I followed the same path, now my hands shoved deep into my pockets. The feeder rocked lightly in the wind, empty. It was shaped like a little wooden house with a pitched roof, Margaret's idea. She'd said it made the birds feel welcome. I don't even know why I reached up to check it. Habit, maybe. But when my fingers touched the wood, I felt something tucked tight between the roof and the post. An envelope. It was wedged in so snug, I almost missed it. The edges of the paper were a little worn, but the flap was still sealed. On the front, in handwriting, I knew instantly, just Franklin. Not Franklin Moore, not Mr. Moore. Just the way Margaret always signed birthday cards or notes on the fridge. Seeing her handwriting froze me in place. I brushed my thumb over the letters as if I could feel her through them. In the corner was a date almost 6 months ago, just a week before she passed. My breath came faster. I looked around the yard half expecting someone to appear and tell me what to do. But it was only me, the frost, and the silence. I carried the envelope inside, sat at the kitchen table and stared at it before tearing it open. Inside was a single sheet of paper folded neatly. No greeting. No Merry Christmas, just Margaret's unmistakable script. If you're reading this, something has happened that I hoped wouldn't. Go to my desk, the top drawer. There's more. That was it. No signature, no explanation. The chair scraped against the floor as I stood and walked to the study. Margaret's desk hadn't been touched since the day she passed. Her pen holder was still there, her glasses resting on a stack of crossword books, a small dish of paper clips by the edge. I pulled open the top drawer. At first it looked ordinary stationery pads, a half-used sheet of stamps. But when I slid my hand along the bottom, I caught on something. Taped underneath was another envelope thicker than the first. A small brass key was clipped to it with a paper clip. Inside was the key, a folded document, and another note in Margaret's hand. Franklin, if Michael ever shuts you out, this will make sense. You'll find everything you need at the place this key opens. It's yours. Always was. You just didn't know it. The paper trembled in my hands. She had known. She'd seen this coming. The document was a deed official looking with my name printed in bold. The address was one I'd never heard of, a property in a little town about 40 minutes away. Hendersonville. I just stared at it, trying to make sense of it all. We had never owned anything there. Margaret had never mentioned it. Not once. Why would she keep something like this from me, and why tie it to Michael, possibly shutting me out? I turned the key over in my palm. The metal was smooth edges, worn from use, but polished clean. I thought about calling my neighbor Carl, maybe telling him what I'd found. But explaining this over the phone felt wrong. This was something I needed to see with my own eyes. I set the envelope and key on the desk, went to the bedroom, and pulled out my old overnight bag. A change of clothes, a flashlight, my wallet, and the thermos Margaret always insisted I carry on long drives. I threw together a sandwich, poured hot coffee into the thermos, and glanced at the clock. Just after 9. The winter sun was low, but the roads would be clear enough. As I zipped my bag shut, my eyes fell on the chair in the corner. Draped across the back was Margaret's old blue cardigan. She'd wear it in bed while reading, sleeves pushed up, glasses slipping down her nose. I reached out and smoothed the fabric. "You thought this through, didn't you?" I said into the empty room. The drive out of town was quiet. I passed the frozen lake, the hardware store where Margaret used to pull me in on Saturdays, and miles of bare trees standing like silent guards. Hendersonville appeared sooner than I expected. A handful of shops, a diner, and a gas station that looked unchanged for decades. The address took me down a gravel road behind a line of pines. I slowed to check the numbers nailed onto mailboxes until one matched the deed. A white house with blue shutters and a stone porch came into view. Not run down, but modest, steady, like it had been waiting. I parked in the drive. The front steps creaked under my boots as I climbed. My hand closed over the key in my pocket. It slid into the lock as if it belonged there. The door gave with a click, and I hesitated. It felt like I was about to step into a space Margaret had just walked out of. Inside, the air was warm, faintly scented of cedar, and something sweet maybe from the old furniture. Everything was tidy, cared for, like someone had been keeping it ready. In the living room, a mantel displayed framed photos. Margaret and me on our 35th anniversary, Margaret barefoot on a beach, sandals in hand, hair flying in the wind. And then one I'd never seen Margaret on this very porch, coffee cup in hand, smiling at someone just outside the frame. The couch looked like the one from our first house. The bookshelf held familiar titles arranged in the exact order she used to keep them mysteries at the top, cookbooks at the bottom. On the coffee table, a folded note lay beside a stack of coasters. I picked it up. "This is yours, in case they ever forget who you are." No date, no other words. I sat down, the note still in my hand. She hadn't just been talking about a house. She meant me, my value, my place in this family. And she'd made sure I wouldn't lose it. I walked into the kitchen. The cabinets held neatly stacked dishes, the pantry stocked with rice, pasta, canned vegetables. The fridge was unplugged but spotless. On the inside of one cabinet door was a grocery list. Margaret's handwriting plain as day: coffee, bread, eggs, sugar. 2 chairs sat at the small table, one with a cushion she had sewn herself. I ran my hand over it, half expecting it to still be warm. Down the hall I found 2 bedrooms, one with a neatly made bed, a quilt folded at the foot. The other nearly empty except for a few boxes marked "Franklin's Things." I didn't open them. Not yet. Back in the living room, I settled in the armchair by the window and looked outside. A birdhouse stood in the yard with a bench beside what must turn into a flower bed come spring. The quiet here wasn't like the silence at home. This was intentional, peaceful. My thoughts drifted back to Ashley's note and that Facebook photo from yesterday. Here they felt smaller, like they belonged to a different world. Margaret had seen it coming, the shorter visits, Ashley speaking for Michael more often than he spoke for himself. Instead of confronting it, she had built a safeguard. She'd left me something that couldn't be taken or claimed without my consent. A place that was mine alone. I don't know how long I sat there watching the light shift across the floor. Eventually I stood, locked the door, and drove back toward town. The key sat warm in my pocket from my hand. I didn't have all the answers yet, but one thing was certain. Whatever was coming, I wasn't as alone as I thought. The day after discovering the cabin, I couldn't shake it from my mind. I woke thinking about the note on the coffee table, about Margaret's handwriting on the grocery list inside the cabinet door. It felt like she had set a place for me there, without ever saying so. I had driven home the night before, but my bag was still packed. The key to the cabin sat on my nightstand, catching the pale morning light. I picked it up, turned it in my hand, feeling the smooth brass. Margaret's second note, the one that said, "If Michael ever shuts you out," echoed in my head. What else had she known, and what else had she prepared that I hadn't yet discovered? I brewed coffee, stood at the kitchen window, and watched frost melt off the lawn. My eyes drifted toward the house next door. Carl Jenkins's old Ford pickup was parked in the driveway. Carl was a longtime friend, a retired lawyer. The kind of man who never missed a Sunday crossword and could rattle off baseball stats from decades ago. If anyone could help me make sense of a deed tucked away in secret, it was him. I took a long drink of coffee, set the mug down, and grabbed the envelope with the deed from Margaret's desk. Carl opened his door in a flannel shirt, holding a half-eaten slice of toast. "Franklin," he said, eyebrows raised. "You're up early? Everything all right?" "Not exactly," I replied. "Got a minute?" He stepped aside, motioning me in. His house smelled faintly of wood smoke and buttered toast. We sat across from each other at his kitchen table, the morning paper folded neatly in front of him. "What's on your mind?" he asked. I placed the envelope on the table and slid it over. He pulled out the deed, adjusted his glasses, and read silently for a moment. When he finally looked up, his eyes were sharper than I'd seen in years. "Hendersonville," he said. "Nice little spot out that way. This is in your name only. No co-owner listed. Did you know about this?" Before I shook my head. "Never even heard of it until yesterday." Carl tapped the paper. "Well, this wasn't accidental. Margaret set it up separate. Legally, no one else can claim it." I leaned back. "Why would she do that?" Carl gave me a long look. "Why do you think I didn't answer right away?" The image of Michael and Ashley at that other Christmas table flickered in my mind, the note Ashley had sent that Facebook post. Carl went on. Franklin people only hide assets to shield them from taxes, creditors, or family disputes. My brow furrowed. Family disputes. He folded his hands. You want me to be direct, please? I've seen plenty of cases where grown kids or their spouses push for control of property after one parent passes. Sometimes it's out of concern. Other times it's about power. I stared at the deed. Margaret had prepared more than I realized. There's more, I said, pulling out the smaller note from the envelope. I slid it toward him. Carl read it, then leaned back in his chair. She was making sure you had options. This cabin is yours, no strings. If God forbid things with Michael ever get messy, you've got a place they can't touch. I let out a long breath. She saw it coming. Franklin Margaret was smart. She noticed things you didn't want to. I thought back to the moments when Ashley spoke in Michael's place. The time she offered to handle my mail after surgery. Or when she suggested she'd manage the bills while Margaret was in the hospital. I'd declined politely. Carl sipped his coffee. You ought to check for more. If she went this far to move property, she might have set up other protections too. I nodded. I'll dig through her files. If you need me, I'm around, he said. And Franklin, don't wait too long. If they're the type to make a move, they won't stay quiet forever. I left Carl's house feeling two things at once, grateful for Margaret's foresight, uneasy about what it meant about my son. Back home, I went straight to Margaret's study. I opened every drawer, checked behind books on the shelves, flipped through her address book. Nothing obvious. No more keys, no hidden envelopes. But in the bottom drawer beneath a pile of old magazines, I found a folder labeled in her handwriting, Household Private. Inside were copies of tax returns, insurance papers, and a list titled Accounts Franklin. Some listed me as the sole owner. A few had been opened only in recent years. One line stood out, Benton and Associates. Trust 2941. Beside it, Margaret had written in parentheses, Ask Carl if needed. Benton and Associates meant nothing to me, but the word trust made me stop. I picked up the phone and called Carl. Ever heard of Benton and Associates? I asked. Silence then, yeah. Gerald Benton, old school accountant, worked with a lot of my clients. Why, his name's in one of Margaret's folders. Something about a trust in my name. Carl whistled. Now that's interesting. He's still in business downtown. You want me to set up a meeting? I agreed. Carl said he'd call Benton and let me know by the afternoon. While I waited, I drove back out to the cabin. This time I opened the boxes marked Franklin's Things. Inside were photo albums, a stack of Margaret's favorite cookbooks, and a small lockbox. The key wasn't in sight. I set it aside for later. In the kitchen, I brewed coffee with the old drip machine, the kind we'd had in our first apartment. I sat at the table, the grocery list still taped inside the cabinet, and thought about how deliberate all this was. Margaret hadn't just left me a fallback. She'd built me a refuge. Back at home, Carl called just after 3. Benton can see you tomorrow morning, he said. Told him you've got paperwork Margaret left. Sounded like he knew what I meant. That night I lay in bed turning it over in my mind, a hidden cabin, a private trust. Margaret's quiet warnings were wrapped in simple words. I could almost hear her voice, calm and certain. If you ever feel like they're pushing you out, you'll know where to go. I hadn't understood it back then. But I did now. By the time the sun came up, I was ready. I put on my best jacket not to impress Benton, but to look like a man who still had a firm grip on his own life. His office was in a modest brick building over a bakery. The smell of fresh bread drifted up the stairwell as I climbed. Inside the reception was plain 2 chairs, a desk, and a wall of filing cabinets. Gerald Benton himself came out to meet me. He looked to be in his late 60s, trim with sharp eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. Mr. Moore, he said, shaking my hand firmly. Come on back." His office walls were lined with bookshelves packed with binders labeled by year. We sat at a small table near the window. "I understand Margaret left you some papers," he began. I passed him the folder. He flipped through, pausing at certain pages and nodding. "Yes, this is what I thought," he said at last. "Your wife set up a private trust in your name about 5 years ago, separate from anything joint. She was very clear on the terms. It's completely yours, no successor trustee but you." I blinked. "Why didn't she tell me?" He gave a faint smile. "She said she didn't want you to feel like you needed it, that it was just a precaution." I leaned back, letting that sink in. "How much is in it?" Benton named a figure that made my breath catch. More than I'd imagined, enough to keep me comfortable for years, no matter what. "She also left instructions," Benton continued. "Said if circumstances shifted, her exact words, and you ever felt pressured or shut out, I was to explain the trust to you in full." My mind went straight to Christmas Day, the courier, the empty table, the Facebook post. "Well," I said softly, "I guess circumstances have shifted." Benton nodded. "I'll prepare the access paperwork. In the meantime, think carefully about how you want to handle things with your family." I let out a dry laugh. That's the million-dollar question. When I stepped outside, the winter air felt sharper. But in my pocket was something solid, not just the cabin key, but the certainty that Margaret had left me something no one could touch. For the first time in a long while, I didn't feel like I was playing catch-up. I felt steady. 3 days after meeting Benton, I was in the kitchen making coffee when I heard tires crunching on the gravel outside. Mid-morning, a time when my driveway was usually empty. Through the window over the sink, I spotted a silver SUV pulling in. Michael's SUV. My grip on the coffee pot tightened. I set it down, dried my hands on a towel, and walked to the front door. The knock came just as I reached for the knob. 3 short raps, then quiet. I opened the door. Michael stood on the porch, hands shoved in his jacket pockets. He gave me a tight smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Hey, Dad?" In the passenger seat of the idling SUV, Ashley scrolled on her phone, not even glancing up. "What brings you here?" I asked evenly. He shifted. "Thought I'd stop by. We haven't talked since Christmas." I leaned against the doorframe. "We could have talked then if you'd been here." A flicker of discomfort crossed his face. "Yeah, about that. Ashley's mom. Well, it just made sense this year, too." I lifted a hand. "No need to explain. I read the note." He cleared his throat. "Right. Well, anyway, I also wanted to check in, see how you're doing, and maybe talk about some things." "Things, yeah. You know, Mom's stuff, the accounts. I was in the garage the other day looking for that old fishing rod, and I saw some boxes with paperwork. Figured maybe you could use a hand sorting through it all." There it was. The real reason. I didn't answer immediately. I studied him the way you size up a chess opponent making the opening move. "What makes you think I need help with that?" I asked. He hesitated, glanced back toward the SUV. "Well, you've got a lot on your plate, and Ashley and I have been talking about maybe helping you manage things, just to be sure everything's in order." "For who?" He blinked. "For you. For everyone, really." I stepped back, gesturing him inside. He walked past me into the living room, scanning it like he hadn't seen it in years. "Still looks the same," he said. "Some things don't need changing," I replied. We sat, me in my recliner, him on the couch. The space between us felt wider than the few feet that separated us. So I said, "Tell me more about this help you're offering." He shifted again, elbows on his knees. "We just think it might be smart to consolidate things, streamline, maybe move some accounts. We've been reading about how vulnerable older folks can be to mistakes or scams." I let the silence stretch heavier with each second. "Older folks, huh? I didn't mean..." "No, I think you did." I leaned forward. "Tell me something, Michael." Did you know Ashley forged my name on a $15,000 check a couple years ago? His head snapped up. What? No, don't lie. I know it went to a contractor in Tennessee for one of her rental projects. He looked away, his jaw tight. That was answer enough. You weren't checking in on me, I said quietly. You were checking on what I have. Dad, it's not like that. For you, maybe it isn't. But from where I sit, it looks a whole lot like you're trying to take control before you've even been asked. He dragged a hand over his face. We just don't want things to get messy down the line. Messy for who, I asked. He didn't answer. Out the window, Ashley was still in the SUV, her phone glued to her ear. She hadn't looked toward the house once since they'd pulled up. She's not coming in, I asked. Michael shook his head. She thought it'd be better if I talked to you alone. I gave a dry laugh. She's probably worried you'll say too much. He frowned. You're overthinking this. I leaned back. No, I'm finally thinking clearly. I let the silence stretch. The clock on the wall ticked steady. I don't need help managing anything, I said at last. Your mother made sure of that. His eyes narrowed. What does that mean? It means I've got everything I need, and I intend to keep it that way. For a moment I thought he'd press harder, but his shoulders sagged. We just want to make sure you're okay. I am, I answered, meaning it for the first time in a while. He stood smoothing his jacket. All right. I'll see you soon then. I followed him to the door. Tell Ashley I said hello. He gave a short nod, stepped off the porch, and walked back to the SUV. Ashley leaned over, saying something as he climbed in. The engine roared, and they backed out without a single glance at the house. I stood there watching their taillights fade down the street, then closed the door. The house was quiet again, but it wasn't the hollow quiet of Christmas Day. This quiet carried understanding. Understanding of what they wanted and just how far I was willing to go to protect what Margaret had left me. I walked into the study, opened the desk drawer, and looked at the cabin key resting inside. Just seeing it steadied me. Benton's words echoed in my mind. You might want to think about how you want to handle things with your family. I already had my answer. Carefully. On my terms. I spent the rest of the afternoon combing through Margaret's files again, this time with sharper eyes. In one folder, I found a list of names, some familiar, some not. Next to Carl's, she'd written trustworthy. Next to Benton's, confidential. And beside a name I didn't recognize, Della Morgan, she had written only in case of trouble. I made a note to ask Carl. That night, sitting in the recliner with the fire crackling low, it hit me Michael and Ashley wouldn't stop at just one visit. This had been their test run, a way to see if I'd let them start rearranging things under the guise of help. They'd be back, and when they came, I'd be ready. It was the first Thursday in January when I spotted the black sedan. Not parked, not moving, just idling at the curb across from my mailbox. At first, I thought it was a delivery mix-up. But the longer it sat, the more it felt like it was waiting. Watching. I stepped onto the porch with my coffee, pretending not to notice. A man in a dark coat sat behind the wheel, head down, as if reading. The tinted windows made the whole thing feel deliberate. 5 minutes passed. 10. Finally, he drove off without so much as a glance at my house. I didn't like it. By noon, I had my jacket on and was walking the half block to Carl's hardware store. Carl had been Margaret's go-to for every home project and mine for the last 5 months. He knew people. The bell above the door jingled as I stepped inside. Franklin, he said from behind the counter. Didn't expect you today. Yeah, well, I leaned on the counter. I saw something this morning I didn't like. Figured you might know if anyone's been asking about me. He raised a brow. How so, black sedan? Parked out front a while. Guy didn't get out, didn't knock, just waited. Carl frowned. Not a plate I recognize. But you know Michael was in here 2 days ago. I kept my face still. What for? Said you needed help getting rid of some old junk. Asked if I had a trailer to haul it. Mentioned you might be downsizing soon. Downsizing? That's what you say when you're clearing someone out? Did you tell him anything, I asked? Carl shook his head. Told him if you needed me, you'd call yourself. Good. I exhaled. You remember that name Margaret had in her papers? Della Morgan? Carl nodded slowly. Yeah. You thinking of calling her? I'm thinking I need to know why Margaret wrote in case of trouble next to her name. Carl reached under the counter, pulled out an old Rolodex, and flipped through until he found a card. He slid it across. She's local. Runs a private consulting outfit, estate planning, dispute resolution, that kind of thing. Not cheap, but she's sharp. Knows what people are worth before they even speak. I pocketed the card. Thanks, Carl. Before I left, he added Franklin. If Michael's making moves, he's not acting alone. Watch your back. I intend to. That afternoon, I dialed the number. A woman's clipped, businesslike voice answered. Morgan Consulting. Is this Della Morgan speaking? My name is Franklin Moore. You don't know me, but you knew my wife, Margaret. There was a pause. Ah, Franklin. Yes, I knew Margaret. She was very clear about the kind of man you are. I wasn't sure if that was good or bad. She had your name in her papers, said in case of trouble. Well, she said, I think trouble's knocking. We agreed to meet the next morning at a small cafe on Main Street. Della was already there when I arrived, sitting in a corner booth with a leather notebook and a cup of tea. She was in her 50s, sharp-eyed, the type who notices everything and wastes no words. Franklin, she said, rising to shake my hand, I'm sorry for your loss. Thank you. We sat. You said trouble's knocking, she began. Tell me about it. So I did Christmas, the note, Michael's visit, the forged check, and now the black sedan. She listened carefully, jotting notes every so often. When I finished, she leaned back and said, Your son and his wife are positioning themselves first by undermining your independence in conversations, then financially, by trying to get access to accounts, properties, or creating the perception that you can't manage them. I nodded. And that sedan could be a private investigator, could be a potential buyer. Either way, it's tied to them. People don't idle outside houses for no reason. I leaned forward. Margaret trusted you, so I'll ask straight, what would you do? She flipped a page in her notebook. Protect the perimeter. Lock down assets. Build a paper trail showing you're not only capable, but that every decision from here forward is your own choice. We spoke for nearly an hour, covering details, property deeds, account signatories, even the cabin Margaret had tucked away for me. At one point she asked, Has anyone besides Michael and Ashley been in your house since Margaret passed? I thought hard. Only once a guy claiming he was from the utility company said he needed to check the meter inside. I let him in, but he never went near the meter. Della's pen froze mid-word. And you didn't call to confirm no? She shook her head. That's a breach. From now on, no one enters without an appointment and ID. You verify yourself. When we walked out of the cafe, she handed me her card. Franklin, I work for clients, not families. That means I'll do what has to be done, even if it ruffles feathers. That's exactly what I'm looking for. On the way back to my truck, I noticed a black sedan parked a few spaces down. Not the same one from outside my street, but close enough to set my nerves on edge. I didn't mention it to Della. Not yet. Back home, I followed her advice right away. Changed the locks, moved key files from Margaret's desk into a lockbox in the attic, and called the bank to set alerts so I'd be notified of unusual activity. That evening, while sifting through Margaret's folders again, I found something I'd missed, a sealed envelope, my name written on the front in her handwriting. I opened it slowly. Inside was a single sheet. If you're reading this, it means you've seen what I saw coming. Trust Della. And don't be afraid to let them think they're winning, until you're ready to show them they're not. I sat there for a long time, the fire dying low in the hearth, thinking how well she'd known me and them. Outside, somewhere down the street, an engine idled for a few seconds before fading away. Trouble wasn't just knocking anymore. It was circling. And now I had my first real ally. It began with a knock, but not the polite kind. Sharp, official. I opened the door to find a man in a beige windbreaker holding a clipboard. "Mr. Moore," he asked. "Yes. I'm here to deliver a notice from the county court. You'll want to read it carefully." He handed me a thick envelope and walked off without asking for a signature. Inside was a petition. Petition for guardianship. My guardianship. Filed by Michael Moore and Ashley Moore. I read the words twice. 3 times. They claimed I could no longer manage my personal or financial affairs because of declining cognitive function. They'd listed examples: an unpaid utility bill confusion with banking passwords, leaving the stove on. Half of it was lies. The other half were half-truths stretched so far they broke. I called Della immediately. She picked up on the second ring. "They've moved faster than I expected," she said after I read her the first paragraph. Guardianship petitions can be dangerous. They're easier to push through than most people realize, especially if the court thinks you're isolated. "I'm not isolated," I said. "No, but they're building a picture where you are. And unless we counter it, that picture becomes reality in the court's eyes." By noon, I was sitting in her office with the petition spread across her desk. "They've even listed the cabin," I said, tapping the last page, "claiming it's at risk of neglect if left under my control." Della made a quick note in her book. "This isn't just about your independence. They want access to the assets tied to that cabin, likely to leverage it for something else." She stood crossed to her filing cabinet and pulled out a folder. "Here's what we do. We build our paper trail medical clearance proving your competent documented records of you managing accounts and witnesses who can testify to your clarity and decision-making." I frowned. "Witnesses?" "Yes. People who've seen you handle contracts, purchases, or property without help. Every detail counts. If we stack more evidence than they do, we win before the hearing even begins. And if we lose her eyes, met mine, then you lose control of everything. But we're not going to lose." The first stop was the bank. I knew the manager, Mrs. Alvarez. She'd known me and Margaret for years. She greeted me warmly. "Franklin, what can I do for you? I need copies of my last 6 months of statements," I said. "And any records showing I've been managing transactions myself." She glanced at Della, then back at me. "Is there trouble?" "Family trouble," I answered simply. "And I need to show I'm still the one steering this ship." She nodded. "You've been in here every month making deposits yourself. I can print records to show that. It'll help." From the bank, we went to Dr. Keller's office. He'd been Margaret's doctor and mine as well. He gave me a quick exam, reflexes, memory questions, a short writing test. When he was done, he leaned back in his chair. "Franklin, you're as sharp as I've ever seen you. I'll draft a letter certifying you have full cognitive capacity." "That's exactly what I need, Doc." On the drive back, Della said, "Now we need witnesses outside your immediate circle. Neighbors, shopkeepers, anyone who's interacted with you in a business setting lately." I thought. "There's Ellen at the hardware store and Raj at the grocery. I've handled all my own orders since Margaret passed." "Perfect," Della said. "We'll get their statements in writing. The more variety we had, the harder it would be for Michael and Ashley to argue bias." We stopped at the grocery store first. Raj stepped out from behind the counter, wiping his hands. "Franklin, how's the house holding up?" "Well enough," I said. "But I've got a favor to ask." When I explained, his face hardened. "They're trying to take control of your life. That's not right. I'll write whatever you need. You're in here every week with your list comparing prices, catching errors. You're sharper than half the people I serve." I smiled. "Thanks, Raj." By the end of the day, we had 6 months of bank statements, a doctor's letter certifying my competency, and 3 witness statements from folks I did regular business with. Della stacked the papers neatly. This is a start. Now we need to file our response to the petition and attach all of this as exhibits. When's the hearing? I asked. 2 weeks, she said. But they'll get our response in 5 days. That's when they'll realize you're not rolling over. That night I sat by the fire, Margaret's letter still locked upstairs. I thought about her words. Don't be afraid to let them think they're winning. Maybe Michael and Ashley believed the petition was their master stroke. Maybe it was. But master strokes cut both ways. 3 days later, Carl called. Franklin, you ought to know Michael was in here again. Bought a lockbox. Said he needed it to keep papers safe before a big change in the family. Did he say what kind of change? I asked. Carl hesitated. He said, and I quote, "Once Dad's affairs are settled, things will move fast." I hung up and immediately called Della. They're not just planning to win, I told her. They're planning to move in the second they think they've got it. Good, she said. Let them think that. It'll make what's coming hit twice as hard. 2 days before our deadline, I walked into the clerk's office with Della and handed over a sealed envelope nearly as thick as the one I'd been served. The clerk stamped it, filed it, and gave me a copy. As we stepped out into the cold January air, Della's eyes shifted across the street. There it was, again, the black sedan. This time the window slid down. Michael sat in the passenger seat smiling like he'd already won. He tapped the side of his head. I smiled back because in that moment I knew something he didn't. The paper trail was already turning against him. 2 days after we filed, I was pruning Margaret's roses in the front yard when the black sedan slowed to a stop in front of my house. Michael got out, slamming the door harder than he had to. He didn't even glance at the flowers. Margaret's flowers just marched up the path with quick, clipped strides like he'd practiced this scene in his head. "Dad," he said, voice tight. "Michael." The cold between us wasn't just January air. He held up a thick envelope, my court response. "You think this is going to work?" I set the pruning shears on the porch rail. "I don't know," I said evenly. "But it's the truth. That's all it needs to be." He stepped closer, the smell of his cologne sharp and out of place for a man visiting his father. "You've made this harder than it had to be. Ashley and I, we could have handled everything. You wouldn't have to worry about bills or repairs." "I'm not worried about bills, Michael." I cut in, voice calm but firm. "I'm worried about being erased from my own life." For a second his eyes flickered. Then his jaw clenched again. "You don't know what you're up against." I tilted my head. Maybe I do. Maybe that's why I prepared for it. He didn't like that. His eyes locked on mine for a long beat. Then he turned and stormed back to the car without another word. That afternoon, Della called. "They've read it," she said flatly. "And they're rattled." "How do you know?" "A clerk friend told me Michael came in this morning asking to expedite the hearing. He's trying to move the date up, which means he's nervous about what else you might have." I let a corner of my mouth lift. He should be. 3 days later, Carl stopped by the house. "Franklin, I probably shouldn't say this, but Ashley was in the store yesterday. Bought a new lock for a storage unit. She was on the phone and I overheard something about getting the cabin papers before you move them." I raised an eyebrow. "Storage unit," Carl nodded. "Over on Ridgeway, drive-up access." I called Della immediately. "She's moving something," I said. "Or planning to." "That's fine," Della replied. "Because whatever she thinks she's moving, it's not going to help them." "What do you mean?" "You remember when we set up the trust for the cabin, the one Margaret insisted on?" "Yes." "Well, last month I had you sign an amendment transferring the deed from your name directly into the trust's protective clause. It's no longer your asset, it belongs to a separate legal entity. Even if they won guardianship, They couldn't touch it without a whole different court case. I exhaled slowly. So they're chasing smoke. Exactly. And the more they chase it, the less they'll see what's really happening. That night I sat in my chair, letting my thoughts drift back to the cabin. Margaret and I had bought it the summer after Michael was born. Back then it was just 2 rooms and a porch, but it sat high on a ridge where the evening light made the valley glow. Margaret loved it so much, she'd hum the same tune every time we drove up the winding road. We'd spent decades fixing it up. New roof wood stove, wraparound deck. The last thing Margaret ever said about it months before she passed was, "Promise me you'll never let it end up in the wrong hands." I promised, and I meant it. A few evenings later, I went for a walk to clear my head. Passing the corner cafe, I spotted Ashley through the window. She was leaning close to a man I didn't know, sliding a folder across the table. He glanced at it, nodded once. I didn't stop or stare, just kept walking. But that image stuck, Ashley handing off that folder like it was part of a relay. 2 days later, the hearing notice arrived, rescheduled for the following Tuesday, less than a week away. I brought it straight to Della's office. "This is good," she said. "It forces them to show their cards earlier. We'll have them reacting instead of dictating." Then she leaned in. "Franklin, I need you ready for one more thing. If they think they're losing, they might try something in public to make you look unstable before the hearing." I frowned. "Like what?" "Could be anything. An accusation, an incident in front of witnesses. Just don't give them an opening." The next morning I went to the community center for the monthly veterans breakfast. I'd skipped the last few months, but I wanted people to see me steady and sharp. It worked. I shook hands, told stories, even helped with the raffle tickets. Old friends like Mark and Eddie laughed with me over burnt coffee, and newcomers listened as I shared about the garden project we'd started back. Each handshake was more than courtesy. It reminded the room I was still part of this community, not some recluse losing his mind. On my way out, Ellen from the hardware store caught me. "Heard there's family drama," she said softly. "If you need someone to vouch for you, you've got my back." I thanked her. Another piece on the board. That night my phone rang. A number I didn't know. When I answered, Ashley's voice came through sweet but brittle. "Franklin, I just wanted to say whatever happens in court, we hope you'll understand. It's for your good." I let the silence hang. Funny thing about my good Ashley. Usually I get to decide what that is. Her tone hardened. "We'll see what the judge thinks." She hung up. I sat there, the fire-low shadows crawling the walls. Upstairs, Margaret's letter was still locked away. The cabin trust papers sat in Della's safe. And the rest, the part they didn't know about, was already in motion. Because while Michael and Ashley chased the cabin, I was shifting everything else, house accounts, even the car, under the same protective umbrella. By the time the hearing arrived, there wouldn't be a single asset in my name worth grabbing. That was the move they'd never see coming. The Saturday before the hearing, I found myself parked half a block from Michael's house engine off Winter Light, spilling over their porch. I wasn't there to spy, not exactly. I just wanted to watch how they moved when they thought no one was watching. Through the bare branches, I saw Ashley carry a stack of boxes to the SUV phone pinned between her shoulder and ear. She spoke quickly, nodding at someone unseen. Michael came out a moment later, carrying what looked like a briefcase. He handed it to her, and they exchanged clipped words before heading back inside. From where I sat, it looked ordinary. But I'd learned enough to know ordinary moments hide intent. I stayed long enough to watch them drive toward the Ridgeway storage facility, the one Carl had mentioned. My fingers tapped the steering wheel, not from nerves, but from a slow, steady awareness they still believed the cabin was their way in. I let them go without following. Instead, I drove home, put the kettle on, and sat at the kitchen table with a legal pad. The fire cracked in the living room. On a legal pad, I started listing every person I'd seen in the past 2 weeks: the cafe, the hardware store, the veterans' breakfast, along with dates and times. It wasn't paranoia. Della had made it clear, if they try to paint you as unstable, we'll need credible witnesses who can say otherwise. Dates, times, interactions. The more ordinary, the better. So I wrote everything down, even the smallest encounters. Ellen from the hardware store, Mark at the breakfast, the mailman who'd stopped to chat about the snow. Each name was another brick in the wall I was building. 2 days later, my phone rang. It was Ellen. "Franklin, you're not going to believe this, but Ashley was in here today with a clipboard." What was she asking? I kept my voice light. "She wanted to know if anyone's noticed you acting confused lately." "And what did you tell her, that you're sharper than most of the folks half your age?" She paused. "She's fishing for trouble." "I know," I said. "Let her fish. She's in the wrong pond." That night I couldn't sleep. I stepped onto the porch, so cold air biting my lungs, and looked over the yard. Margaret used to say, winter is when the truth shows itself. Trees stripped bare, no leaves to hide behind. Standing there, I felt the truth, as plain as the frost beneath my boots. Michael and Ashley weren't looking out for me. They were looking out for themselves. And somewhere along the way, they'd convinced themselves those two things were the same. Monday morning, Della called. "They filed an emergency addendum," she said, "claiming you've been making financially reckless decisions. They cite selling the old pickup and donating to the Veterans Fund." I almost laughed. "I sold the truck because I don't need two, and I gave to the fund because I believe in it." "I know," Della said, "but they'll spin it as impulsive. We'll counter with proof those were planned, rational choices. Do you still have the bill of sale in the file cabinet's second drawer? Good. Bring it tomorrow." That afternoon, sorting through the files, I found something I hadn't looked at in months, a photo of Margaret and me on the cabin deck the summer before Michael got married. Her hair blown by the wind, her smile easy. Michael had been there too, standing off to the side, face buried in his phone. Even then, I'd sensed he was already drifting toward Ashley's orbit. She had a way of pulling people in, convincing them her approval was the most valuable thing they could have. Tuesday night, as I was locking up, there was a knock at the door. Michael stood there, hands in his coat pockets. "Dad," Tony began, "we're hosting a little get-together tomorrow night. Friends, neighbors? Ashley thought you might like to come." I studied him. "Tomorrow night? That's the night before the hearing." He smiled, but it never touched his eyes. "Exactly. A chance to clear the air, show everyone we're all on the same page." The invitation wasn't hospitality, it was optics. If I showed up and said something they could twist, they'd have proof. If I didn't, they'd claim I was isolating myself. "I'll think about it," I said. That night, I called Della. "Don't go," she said immediately. "They're staging something. A friendly gathering the night before a hearing isn't friendly." So I stayed home. Instead of showing up at Michael and Ashley's gathering, I made sure to be visible elsewhere, stacking donated coats at the Veterans Center, talking with people who'd remember I was there. The morning of the party, I drove past their street coming back from the store. Cars lined both sides of the block. Through the front window, I caught a glimpse of Ashley in a bright red dress, laughing with neighbors. Michael was pouring drinks. Now and then, their eyes flicked toward the door, waiting for me, I figured. I kept driving. The next day, Carl stopped me outside the post office. "Franklin, you missed quite the evening," he said. "Ashley was telling folks you've been having memory slips." Michael looked uneasy, but he didn't stop her. I thanked him, though my chest tightened. Suspecting they'd smear me was one thing. Hearing how casually they did it was another. That night, I combed through my folder again. Every receipt, notarized document, neighbor's statement, it was all there. Between the pages lay the cabin trust papers, a quiet reminder that not everything they wanted was within reach. Before bed, I wrote a note and slipped it into my jacket pocket. 4 words Margaret would be proud of. It wasn't for the court. It was for me, a shield against whatever storm Michael and Ashley thought they could stir up. When I finally turned out the light, the house was quiet. It used to feel heavy. Tonight it felt like calm before a tide turns. Tomorrow the line would be drawn. This time I wasn't stepping into their game. I was bringing my own board, and they wouldn't see the final move until it was already played. The courthouse smelled faintly of old files and burnt coffee. Morning light cut through tall windows, striping across polished benches. I sat at the plaintiff's table with Della hands folded, eyes on the grain of the wood. Across the aisle, Michael and Ashley whispered with their lawyer, a slick-haired man in a navy suit who looked fresh out of a financial services commercial. Ashley's red nails drummed on the armrest. Michael tugged at his tie, glancing at me, then away. The bailiff called the room to order. The judge, a woman in her 60s with a steady, unsparing gaze, took her seat. She scanned the docket and said, "Let's proceed." Michael's attorney spoke first. His voice smooth, practiced. "Your Honor, my clients are deeply concerned for the well-being of Mr. Moore. They've observed patterns of erratic decision-making, selling valuable assets, making large donations without consulting family, and most notably attempting to transfer property under questionable circumstances. They fear for his ability to manage his affairs and request to be appointed legal guardians to ensure his safety and preserve his estate." He sat as though he'd just sealed a case. Ashley patted his arm like he'd delivered a flawless show. Della rose slowly, gathering her notes. "Your Honor, my client, Mr. Moore, has been the target of a calculated effort to strip him of his independence and his property. The so-called patterns cited by the plaintiffs are nothing more than responsible choices made by a competent adult. We will demonstrate these claims are baseless and that the true motive here is control, specifically control of a lakeside cabin that has been in Mr. Moore's family for generations." The judge gave a single nod. "Proceed." We started with the receipts. The sale of the old pickup, a notarized bill of sale with the buyer's statement showing the deal had been set weeks ahead. Then the donation to the Veterans Fund, documented letters proving it was part of a planned yearly contribution, something Margaret and I had done for years. Ashley shifted in her chair as each document slid across to the judge. Michael stared straight ahead, his jaw clenched. Then came the witnesses. Ellen from the hardware store testified first, describing how she'd spoken with me several times recently, every exchange clear, steady, coherent. Next was Mark from the Veterans Breakfast. He told the court how I'd helped organize coat donations, kept track of sign-in sheets, even joked about his awful handwriting. Each account stacked up just as Della had promised, brick by brick, a wall of credibility. About halfway through, Michael's attorney tried to poke holes. "Mr. Moore, isn't it true you've misplaced important papers and had to call your son for help?" I met his eyes without blinking. "I misplaced a utility bill. Found it 10 minutes later under the newspaper. If that's grounds for incompetence, Your Honor, then half the state belongs under guardianship." A low ripple of laughter moved through the courtroom. Even the judge's lips twitched. But the real shift came when Della called Carl Thompson. He took the stand broad-shouldered in a pressed flannel and swore in. "Mr. Thompson," Della began, "you mentioned overhearing a conversation at the storage facility involving the plaintiffs. Could you tell the court what you heard?" Carl nodded. "Yes, ma'am. I was dropping off tools when I heard Ashley say that once the papers were signed, they could list the cabin and split the money before spring. She said, and I quote, 'He'll thank us later when he's somewhere safe.'" The air changed instantly. Ashley's head snapped toward Michael, whose face went crimson. Their lawyer objected, but the judge overruled. "Mr. Thompson," she asked, "you're certain of what you heard?" "Clear as day," Carl replied. Didn't sound like concern for his well-being. Sounded like they were planning a sale. From that moment, momentum was ours. Della guided the judge through the trust documents proving the cabin couldn't be sold without my consent. She emphasized the timing, how their supposed concerns only surfaced after Ashley learned the cabin wasn't part of the estate. When it was my turn, I kept my words plain. I'm 72 years old. I've worked my whole life, served my country, and paid my bills. I'm not perfect, but I'm capable of making my own choices. My wife and I built that cabin as a family place, not a bargaining chip. If my son and daughter-in-law can't accept that, that's on them, but they don't get to take mine. The judge leaned back silent for a long beat. Then she spoke, Mr. More based on the evidence and testimony, I find no grounds to grant the petition for guardianship. Furthermore, I am issuing a protective order preventing the plaintiffs from interfering with your property or financial decisions. She added, the court strongly advises both parties to seek counseling if they want to repair their relationship, though that is outside this court's jurisdiction. Her gavel came down with a sound that felt like a lock sliding shut. Michael's shoulders sagged. Ashley whispered something sharp into his ear, but he didn't turn to her. Their attorney was already packing up eyes on the next case. Della leaned toward me, her smile steady but small. It's over, she said. Walking out into the cold, the winter sun felt warmer than it had in months. The air cut clean and sharp through my lungs. Ahead of us, Michael and Ashley hurried down the steps, their heads bent close together. They never looked back. Carl clapped my shoulder. You held your ground, Franklin. Margaret would be proud. I only nodded, my throat too tight to answer. That night I sat at the kitchen table with a mug of tea, the house wrapped in quiet. The court win mattered, yes, but more than that was the certainty my voice hadn't been erased. I still had a say in my own life. On the counter, Margaret's photo caught the lamplight. I imagined her smile steady, calm, like the lake on a still morning. I didn't toast with champagne or go out for dinner. I just went to bed knowing that when I woke up, my life was still mine. And for now, that was enough. The morning after, I woke before dawn. Old habits die hard. I lay there listening to the silence. No buzzing phone, no knock at the door, just the hum of the furnace, the tick of the kitchen clock. I made coffee the way Margaret always had. One heaping spoon of grounds, a dash of cinnamon, hot water poured slow. The smell filled the kitchen, rich and comforting. I carried the mug to the back porch, where the cold air stung my face, and watched daylight spill across the lake. It looked different now. Not because the water had changed, but because the fear was gone, the fear of losing not just the cabin, but my say in my own life. I had plans for the day, simple ones. Meeting Carl at the Veterans Center to patch a leaky roof. Maybe stop at the hardware store, see if Ellen still had those cedar planks on sale. Little things, but they were mine again. Around 9, the phone rang. I knew the number and let it go to voicemail. Michael's voice came through, Dad. We need to talk. Ashley and we made mistakes. Call me. I set the phone down. I didn't delete it, but I didn't call back either. Not yet. I was done playing defense. From here on, I moved on my terms. Later that morning, I drove out to the cabin. Snow crunched under the tires as I eased down the narrow road. It looked the same, pines heavy with snow, the porch swept clean from my last visit. The door creaked open like an old friend's greeting. Inside the quilt, Margaret maid still lay folded on the couch. A photo of us breaking ground, me in work boots, her in a sun hat, hung by the mantel. I stacked kindling, lit a fire, and let the warmth seep into my bones. At noon, Carl showed up with a thermos of chili and 2 beers. Figured you'd be here, he said, stomping snow off his boots. Thought we might christen your freedom. We ate at the kitchen table, steam curling up from the bowls. He talked about the roof project, the new guy at the center, and the rumor that Ellen was finally retiring. Just ordinary talk. It felt good. When he left, I walked down to the dock. The lake was half frozen ice catching the pale sun. I remembered winters Margaret and I skated until our toes went numb, then thawed by the fire. She always said this place had a heartbeat. Maybe that heartbeat was what kept me fighting. A few days later, a letter arrived, not from Michael, but from Ashley. Handwritten 3 pages. She wrote about her childhood, about watching her parents fight over property, about wanting security. She admitted she'd handled things poorly, but stopped short of apology. She asked if we could find a way forward. I read it twice, then folded it neatly and tucked it into a drawer with the firewood receipts. Some things could wait. While they worried over assets, I'd been thinking about my life. The week after the hearing, I met with Della again. Papers covered her desk. "You're all squared away, Franklin," she said. "The trust is airtight. No one touches the cabin without your say." "Good," I told her, "but I want to go further." She raised an eyebrow. "How so?" "When I'm gone, I want the cabin turned into a retreat for veterans and their families. No sale, no private hands. It stays what it was meant to be, a place to feel whole." Her smile was slow but certain. "That can be done." So January and February weren't spent worrying about who might take from me, but building something to outlast all of us. In March, I hosted the first weekend retreat, 10 vets, some with spouses, a few with kids. We cooked over the fire pit, swapped stories, fixed the old snowmobile. One night, a young dad told me it was the first time in years he'd felt his family truly belonged somewhere. I just nodded, but inside something finally loosened. Spring came with an unexpected knock on the cabin door. Michael stood there alone, hands shoved in his jacket. "Dad," he said softly, "I heard about what you're doing here with the vets. I think it's good." We stood in silence, heavy but not sharp. "I'm not here to ask for anything," he added. "Just to say I'm sorry." It didn't erase the past, but it was a start. After he left, I walked back to the dock. The lake was thawing, breaking into glittering shards. I thought of Margaret, of the Christmas envelope that had seemed like an ending. Now I knew better, it was the beginning. The revenge had been quiet, legal, complete. But the real victory was this, sitting on my dock in my life, knowing I had chosen every step that brought me here. The lake lapped gently at the shore. Somewhere a loon called. For the first time in a long while, I felt at peace. That was both an ending and a beginning. Thank you for walking this journey with me. If you enjoyed this story, please like the video, subscribe to the channel, and share your thoughts in the comments. To hear the next story, click on the playlist now showing.